Hi Booktube! So I'm here to talk about the books I read in May. I have my handy dandy notebook here where I'm not keeping track of every single book I read each month. I use Goodreads for that, even though I have seen technical glitches where I've marked books read and they're on my want to read list and things like that, vice versa. But for the most part, Goodreads is okay enough to keep track of that. And then in this book, I am keeping track of how many of my own books that I've read versus, library books and audiobooks and things like that. Just a general tally of the books. So I read a total of 23 books in May, and I participated in 2 reading events. One that was hosted here on Booktube, or Mayhem. I read a total of 13 books for that. And the majority of those books were like children's books, so the quantity is due to a lot of them were shorter, like 250 pages, so I was able to just fly through those, and that was a lot of fun to do. And then I also participated in National Short Story Month, and that was in May, and so I read 3 short story collections for that event. And then as far as the books I owned and all of that, I read 13 books off my shelf, and I read 8 ebooks and 2 audiobooks. For fiction versus nonfiction, there was 19 fiction books and 4 nonfiction books. And that makes sense because my focus last month was fiction. And so yes, then I listed my favorites for each section. And so I'll talk about the horror mayhem books, like my favorite horror books. And so for my favorite of the ones I read of those 13 was The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons. I have seen her off and on in random used bookstores, and they often look like women's fiction stories. They often have like, beach settings or a house. They don't look spooky at all, so I had no idea that she wrote a spooky book. But I heard about this book from Randy Fray's channel, Illiterate Texan. I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description below to his channel, but he had recommended this book in one of his horror mayhem videos, and I thought, oh, I'll have to give that a try, and it turned out to be my favorite of the month. It's following a couple who are very much connected and very insular in their world. They're very much like a married couple where they do lots of things together, and their best friend is their partner, and so but they do interact with their neighbors, but they're very much dependent and codependent on each other, and that's how they succeed through the world, and they have each other's backs. But they do mingle with the neighborhood. They're very happy to enter this new neighborhood because it's very much a wealthy upper middle class area, and so they just make the cut to get in there, and so they're rubbing elbows with the rich class. And there's a empty lot beside their house, and they think no one's gonna build there. They actually had the possibility of buying that lot, but they didn't have the money at the time when they purchased their house. And it's on a hill, and so it's very awkward area to build. So they thought this will just be empty and it'll be perfect because then we'll have like a little mini forest behind our house. But one day they, not them, but the house does get built on that property. And even before the house is finished construction and on the market, there's these random things that are happening, things that can't exactly be explained. For example, so I got hair in my eye. I'm sitting on the floor, so I think the Fable's dog hair got stirred around in the air. Anyway, yeah. So before it got put on market, like these random animals were being like viciously killed, like not how a cat or a dog would kill these animals, and so little things like that. So it's very ominous to start with, and then it follows. Each part of the book is a new family moving into the house, and different things are happening, and it's just escalating every time a new family is in there until it gets to like the breaking point. And so then the couple has to decide, do they want to wreck this world that they have built, this close-knit community, and wreck it all, ruin it by admitting to what this house beside them is like, admitting this horror, and people not believing them, and how does that make them appear, and things like that. It's like a very society focused kind of book, and I just thought it was so interesting. It was spooky, but it also I feel like I had a really good balance with the couple and the neighborhood and then the spookiness of it. I really liked it. And I want to read more of her books. She wrote quite a few, but this is what I feel like is a standout compared to the others. So I might not like them as much, but we'll see. And let me see here. So then, oh yeah, if we'll continue on with the horror mayhem, and they also kind of like join up with the short story collections, because I read two horror-related short story collections. Haunted Castles, The Complete Gothic Stories by Ray Russell. And this, it was a disappointment for me. It had so much hinging on like the moral acts of people. And the stories weren't too riveting either. So it just was like kind of like a turn off completely for me. And I just like kind of like ripped my teeth and pushed my way through it after like story number 4 or 5. I was like, okay, I understand what all these stories are going to be like, and there was nothing new the rest of the story. So some of them I kind of like skimmed, and I'm like, okay, I get it, and it's just wasn't for me. And then the other one that was horror related was When Things Get Dark, stories inspired by Shirley Jackson. And so the stories inspired by Shirley Jackson is what made me want to pick this up. And I did recognize some of the authors, and like the ones mentioned here on the cover: Joyce Carol Oates, Josh Malerman, Carmen Maria Machado, Paul Tremblay. I think those are all pretty recent horror writers of the current day. And I don't religiously follow any of these authors, but I hear a lot about them here on BookTube, and I read a couple of their books, and I like them enough. But this did not live up, of course, I feel like it can't, to Shirley Jackson. She was famous for The Lottery, and she had several short story collections, and this just did not measure up in the slightest. Some of them were good, some of them were just like, middling. And so overall, this collection for me was just very much middling. You don't need to run to go pick it up. You're not going to hate it, but I wouldn't say you were necessarily going to love it either. That kind of short story collection. So yeah, that was, I mean, I feel like that can happen with anthology collections. And so let's see here. And then for the other horror mayhem books I read, one of the books off my shelf was Thornhill by Pam Smythe. I found this at a Little Free Library several months ago, maybe up to a year ago, I'm not sure. And I liked it because it is a hardcover with the pictures, printed on the actual binding here, which I like. It doesn't have a dust jacket, and I liked how there's tons of illustrations all throughout, and I think it's also illustrated by the author, I want to say. Yeah. And so, but it's like, I can't remember, there's something with like a hot air balloon or something. Some children's author that has a similar style where there's illustrations, and then it goes to the story. Let's see here, so I can show you. And the black pages in between break up the font versus the picture. So you have two storylines here, which is like 1982, and then the other storyline, does it ever show the year? Let me see here. I don't think it does, because the other story is told through the pictures. It might in one of, like, I think sometimes there's little pictures of the year, but this is about two different people that are living in this neighborhood in two different time periods. And so one of the stories is told through print, and the other is told through pictures. And this was just okay for me. I don't want to go through all of these because I have quite a few, but I thought it was interesting enough because of the design of it, but it just didn't live up to the spookiness of the cover. But it's following two different storylines, and one of them is like a ghost like haunting the area, and the other one is like the real living girl who's in this area, and so they're communicating with each other, and it has a little bit of a spookiness, and I do like the art style. I feel like that gives the right tone to it. And there's also these creepy dolls that are found, and there's an explanation for that. But yeah, like this one right here, it's very creepy looking. But yeah, it was just an okay story. I'm happy I didn't purchase it and just found it at a Little Free Library. This was originally retailing for $20. It's this, and the sticker back here, so 2017. So that probably is right around when it came out. So happy to have got that off my shelf. And then I read a whole host of horror mayhem related like YA books. So I read a book by Diane Ho. And again, I don't want to go through too much detail with these, but I'm just gonna like briefly show you the ones I read. This one had an interesting ending, I'll say. It's about a woman, a college student, and she's new to the area, and so she's meeting all her roommates and people across the hall from her, and you know, things are happening, and she's being preyed upon. It has a very interesting twist to the ending that I did not see coming, I'll say that. So I liked it enough, although it was a bit out there. And then speaking of a bit out there, Night of the Pom Pom by Sarah Jett. This she wrote this, I think, when she was a teenager, because this is a teen sensation. And when I looked her up back when I read this at the beginning of the month, I think she only published this book and maybe one other. But it wasn't terrible. But it says Secrets of the Sacred Pom Pom, and you want to believe that it's, you know, following a local high school cheerleading group, and you know, the rivalry and the teenage drama, and you know, the popular girl versus, you know, like the ugly duckling kind of story. But the plot is absolutely ridiculous. Like, this pom pom, I can't even say it. I don't want to spoil it if anyone wants to read this, but the actual pom pom is something going on with it where it's basically evil. It's this ridiculous storyline. There's a whole bunch of things involved in it, but there's like floating bodies and floating people, and people with powers, like magical powers, but no one is up to any good. So yeah, I like the high school part, like, you know, the teenage drama, but the horror part of it was just, you couldn't read it with a straight face. I feel like I had to like laugh every time. So I liked it for that. I read your Christopher Pike book, Weekend. I didn't care for this book at all. The main characters, there's 4 girls and four guys and 5 girls, and they're all going to this ocean beach house in Mexico, and none of them were likable. Like gritting my teeth reading about them. I couldn't stand, especially the main characters. Yeah, I can't remember what the names of them were, but yeah, this is I have several other Christopher Pike books because I equate him to Earl Stein, but I don't remember reading any of his books as a kid. But hopefully the other ones are better than this, because this came out in 1986, and so I know he wrote, you know, quite a few books. So hopefully the other ones are better. The other ones I have on my shelf, because this one. But yes, it's a mystery, because, you know, they get to this house and, you know, things start happening. People start dying, and one girl is severely sick and getting sicker by the minute, and so like something is going on here, and you know, who done it kind of thing. And, you know, like Agatha Christie, you know, they all go to the house and they all start, you know, falling off. And so yeah, it's kind of like that, but and nowhere near the level of quality of Agatha Christie. I read a Fear Street book, Lights Out, and this is following a camp. What's the camp called? I remember it had a name, Camp Nightwing, and this was okay. It was following a girl who, you know, going to the camp at sea, and so she's trying to figure out the mystery, and so as she, because the mystery of these deaths that were happening. But she's putting herself in harm's way, of course, and so she's being, it's like this is more like a thriller than a horror, of like, you know, she's being, you know, chased after and getting these ominous notes and things like that. And the other R.L. Stein book I read was Sunburn. It's like really ratty copy. And this was weird because it opened up with a girl being buried in the sand, and her friends are gone, and so I'm like, what kind of friends are this? Because she's so sunburned on her face, and so luckily a guy walks by and like helps her out, because she was so buried in there that she couldn't get out, and the waves were coming, you know, the tide was coming in, and so if she couldn't get out, she was gonna die. And like, these friends had left her like hours ago. She fell asleep. First of all, how can you fall asleep if you're buried in the sand? I don't know, because that can't be that comfortable. But so it was a very weird introduction to this friend group that you're supposed to be following and liking. But but yeah, and so then they go to this house and they're by themselves. There's a maid that like fluttering in and out, but mostly it's just these teenagers. And yeah, a lot of them are unlikable, and it's like questioning this girl's friend group, and it all unravels from there. And then I read 2 of these Apple paperbacks, and these are more like like the young adult, and then these are children's ghost stories. And these 2 I found at a library sale, and they came in a box set of ghost stories, the Apple paperback ghost stories. And so I read The Ghostmobile and Ghost Beneath Our Feet. I like this one more, but are they both set in Wisconsin, if I remember correctly? I think so, because this one is taking place where they're moving to this like little farming area, and so their father is reconstructing this old schoolhouse. They're going to turn it into a house, and so where the kids are just like playing around the yard and helping out with the garden, things like that. And then they see these this bus pull up, and they think it's like a UFO or something, but it's actually 2 ghosts in this ghost bus that are stuck on this route. So every Monday you see them driving by, and like they would hide it from the parents, them talking to this group of ghosts. And it was very weird in a way of like, you think it's like a normal story of kids learning about this new area that they're in, but then you have this like weird ghost plot interweaving in there. But yeah, I did like it enough. And then the other one, Ghost Beneath Our Feet, is about a sister and a brother who are going to this small town, and I think it was Wisconsin, or Michigan or something. I'm pretty sure it was Wisconsin, but it doesn't say on the back. And they, the girl is noticing weird things are happening. She's seeing like ghosts in the mirror like this, or these like these rumblings beneath the ground. And the neighbors, this old lady keeps saying that there's ghosts in the ground, this old like mining town. And so the ghosts are like wandering the mining shafts that are like beneath the house. And so it was very interesting, because like again, both of these stories could be told without this horror element, just stories in themselves, and then you have this, and it completely derails it from where you think it's going. And let me see here, is that all of the horror books I read? Yes. Okay, so we covered all of those. And yeah, like I mentioned before, when I picked these books, it's not my normal forte, but it was fun to dive into that kind of genre, because otherwise I read them in October. And so going back to the short story, the National Short Story Month, I read those 2, the Ray Russell book, and then I read When Things Get Dark. And then the other short story collection I read was my favorite of the short story collections, and that was F. Scott Fitzgerald's Flappers and Philosophers. And it reminded me of all the other F. Scott Fitzgerald books I've read, where I feel like he's so in the 1920s, and all of the female characters, or most of them, remind me of his wife, Zelda Fitzgerald, and all the men I feel like are him, or characters in his books. I should have looked up beforehand if these came before his, not like if he was a short story writer before he became a novelist, and so did he pull a lot in his future career as a novelist. But this fits so much within his genre of books, that yeah, it was like I was diving into his novels. Yeah, I really liked this one, and I got a bind up of this, and the other one was the one with like Benjamin Button, and I know that story just from like the movie I saw is completely different than his normal stories. And I'll have to read that one. That one seemed a bit thicker book, so I'll have to read that one maybe this month or in July. So let me see here. So that was all of the ebooks, and then as far as like these random books that I have piled up here, I have 2 other YA or middle grade books. I have Best Friend by Shirley Simon, about a girl who is losing her best friend because the best friend is moving to a different apartment. This takes place, I want to say, was it Cleveland? Because I would assume, New York City, all these people live in apartments. But no, I think it was Cleveland. And so she has to learn to live without her best friend. Like, what is her life without her best friend? Because she seems to only have the one friend. and you just like some associates, acquaintances, and so she's like rebuilt her life, and it's hard to do because, you know, she's a teenager, and, you know, and all of that. And so this was fun enough. And then the other one I read was Across the Rolling River, The Caroline Years by Celia Wilkins. I want to say this is book 4 or 5 in the Caroline Years series, and this is Laura Ingalls Wilder's mother's her story. And so this is her meeting Charles, and she meets him while he is playing the violin in the woods, and he's mimicking the different birds, the bird songs. And so I thought it was a cute way of them meeting. And so I wanted to continue on with the series because I've been dabbling in them here and there. So I wanted to hopefully eventually finish all of these, you know, read the Caroline Years, then Laura, and then her daughter Rose, and get through those now that I own them all. Okay, so then going into the nonfiction, I forgot to mention, like, my favorite horror was The House Next Door, and the favorite fiction book. Oh, I forgot to get a picture of the cover. That was my favorite fiction book, because I'm covering the physical books I read along with some of the ebooks. But I meant to get, yeah, anyway, was Terry Wilson's Faking a Fairy Tale. And this is like, I think really the last book I read this month. And maybe that's why it was my favorite fiction book, but it was just it was so charming. It's part of a trilogy, and it's following a wedding magazine where there are, it's 3 like really close-knit friends. And so the first book, and they had their meetup. So this is like the second friend, and it was just so cute. Like the way Terry Wilson writes things, it was all like cupcakes and like champagne and New York City shopping, Tiffany's, and like cute dogs and all of that. And so it's following what is it called? Not friends to lovers. It's the where they don't like each other, and enemies to lovers. There you go. Where it's 2 co-workers, and they have just been butting heads nonstop. But their boss decides that because, you know, they work at a wedding magazine, that she wants them to like go undercover and check out this engagement how-to event where there's these classes where you learn how to mingle and what's the appropriate things to do as you're planning your wedding and hosting the event at the reception. And so they go undercover, and of course they fall in love along the way and learn to actually like each other and not be irritated with all these little peddly things that were irritating them before. And so it was just a really cute story. And then let me see, my favorite nonfiction was Books of the Century. I finally finished this book. I believe I picked this up in March for March of the Mammoths, and it's it didn't fully hit this. The March of the Mammoths is 800 pages, and this is 664. But I believe I picked this up in March for that event. Books of the Century: 100 Years of Authors, Ideas, and Literature, from the New York Times Book Review. And so this is a bind up of, let's see, when the first story, it was in 1897, and the last one is 1999. The last one is by J.M. Coetzee, and the first one is, I think they're anonymous at the beginning, a review of Henry James' The Spoils of Ponton. But I have an updated edition where the last section is the editor's choice. So he went from like the 1970s through 99, picking his favorites, along with the whole group had picked for each decade and each year. And so this was really interesting to see the shifts in how stories were written and the popular stories of the day. And what was interesting too is how a lot of what was interesting in that time period, I've never heard of them before. Like something from 1900 that was popular back then is off the radar now. And so I really liked it for that. And I liked that because I don't read a lot of book reviews, hardly any. And so I liked, actually diving into, what book reviews are like and how that has shifted over time as well. So I just thought it was a really, really interesting, book about books bind up. And then, let's see, I read There Have to Be Six by, this doesn't have a cover, Amelia Muller, A True Story About Pioneering in the Midwest. And I had a cover, but it completely fell apart on me because this was from like 1960 something, 1966. And it's about a family that they originally start in Kansas, and they think they have it pretty bad. I'm not going to keep holding this up because it's just a blank cover, but I think they have it pretty bad. Their house is, you know, old and it's small for this big family, and so and the winters are tough, and so they decide let's go to not they decide, the father decides without really consulting the mother that, oh, and this is a nonfiction, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned that. They decide he's going to go somewhere in the vicinity of Houston, Texas, way back when, and it's like a little town that's like just a street light kind of town, and it's so much worse because the bugs are rampant, and while the winter is nice, they escaped, you know, that Kansas winter. The summer is brutal. You know, there's no air conditioning, there's no fans, there's no modern conveniences at all. And their house is just like completely bug ridden. And then the hurricanes come, because they're right there on the coast, and they had no idea about that. And so this farm that they're trying, this agriculture, you know, they're trying to cultivate, is just getting flooded and washed away every single year. And so they, you know, the finances that they had in Kansas is much smaller in Texas. So they barely make it out, you know, to scramble, and so they're able to move into friends of family in northern, it was Oklahoma, but they keep trying to get back to Kansas. And so the main character, you know, Amelia, the one who wrote the story, talks about growing up in all these different rental homes and how her dream was to have a house of her own. But then, you know, there's a family of 6. There's because the father was saying 6 kids. That's enough. That's a good round number. Even though, you know, it's really hard to afford that. You know, the children help with it's like farming that they're doing, and it's like, you know, more of like a time period book of what it was like, you know, back in those days in these like really small towns and just trying to make ends meet. And then the last book I completed that was nonfiction was The Saga of the American Civil War, None Died in Vain by Robert Leckie, with this really interesting cover here. And this is like a, you know, bind up, you know, not bind up, this is, you know, just a story told in one book, whereas I know I've read many different kind of trilogies of the Civil War. This is, you know, just in the one book, and so for that reason, I would recommend this along with, you know, Battle Cry of Freedom, or I know Bruce Catton had a one, I think he did, you know, a one. Why am I blanking on the term for it? One book that tells a full story of the Civil War, as well. But yeah, I really liked this. It you know, told the story, you know, from beginning to end, and that in between some sections, when he introduces a new person, he gives a couple page biography, so you fully understand, you know, Lincoln and Sherman and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and all those, like, the main characters in here. So it gives you a lot of that holds your hand through the story, but he helps you to fully grasp, you know, these characters, where you're not just reading a name constantly, like, who is that? You know, you don't have to have, basically I'm saying, you don't have to have read a bunch of Civil War books before you get to this one. This is a good introductory book for the Civil War, and so for that, I really recommend it for that. And he is a good storyteller as well. The one thing I'll say is when it gets to the battle maps, I don't think I've ever seen a military or war book where it doesn't, I'm trying to find one, where it doesn't include where the 2 sides were stationed as the battles were taking place. So I'm trying to find one, but here we go. So he just has the map of the area with some of the town names. So this was the first Bull Run, and so he has like some of the names of what he's going to be talking about when he covers this battle in the following chapter. He doesn't show you where the enemy and where the Union and the Confederate side are stationed, where normally you would see, you know, where they're going to be. And so as the battle goes on, you'll see it, you know, the blocks of both sides move around. But this doesn't have that. It just has a map of the area. So I wish it had that, because I think, you know, as an introductory book to the Civil War, that would really help as well, to fully see the flow of at least, you know, each day. At least that would help, I think. And like I said, I've seen that in almost every other Civil War book I've read. So anyway, those are the books I read. Oh, I forgot to mention, because I think I had another tally here. Yeah, I read 13 of my own books, 8 ebooks, and 2 audiobooks. I can't remember if I covered that part. I took notes on everything, so I think that's all I wanted to cover. So I feel like all in all, I had a good reading month. I read a bunch of these shorter books here for the horror mayhem, but I feel like I balanced it out with these like bigger chunky books, and really the smaller books helped me focus on these two, because I had been reading them for quite a while, and so it gave me the time to really dive in and get through them, and not have them constantly lingering on my side table. So anyway, hopefully I'll have a good June as well. Like I mentioned in my last video, I'm going to be traveling the last 2 weeks plus in June, and so we'll see how my reading goes. But, you know, that's life. You know, things, you can have up and down months reading wise, like, but I just want to, you know, spend my time wisely on good books, you know, of course. So anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, BookTube.